Jeb is the governor there, and Jeb has promised to deliver Florida to the Texas governor. As a matter of fact, on the stump a couple of times, George W. has said that if Jeb doesn't deliver Florida, that Thanksgiving dinner in Kennebunkport is going to be mighty chilly. So they're waiting right now to find out if they're going to have a warm Thanksgiving dinner with the Bush family in Kennebunkport. Dan?
Bill Whitaker in Austin. I want to remind you that without Florida, George Bush can still win if he runs the table of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon. Without Florida, George Bush could win by taking all three of those states. Al Gore to win must carry Florida plus one of these remaining three states, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Oregon. I believe that that's correct. Now, in the Washington Senate race, and this is not to take this lightly, the Democrats have picked up a Senate seat in Washington. Maria Cantwell, 42 years old, a former 1st District Congresswoman in Washington, has beaten the two-term 72-year-old Senator Slade Gorton. Now, Bob Schieffer, what does this do to our calculations of whether the Republicans will or will not control the Senate?
Well, it means that the Democrats have now picked up a net 2 seats. They've won 4 tonight, they've lost 2, so they're plus 2. If they should then win the seat in Michigan, which we still think is too close to call, and the seat in Missouri, which we think is too close to call, or the one in Montana, but all they have to do now is win 2 more to have a 50-50 tie in the Senate. They have a very good chance to do that in Michigan and in Missouri. We think the Republican, Conrad Burns, is still leading out in Montana. That would be a hold for the Republicans. The seat out in Nebraska is still too close to call. A 50-50 tie in the Senate is now a very live possibility, Dan.
And keeping in mind that when there's a 50-50 tie, the vice president casts the tie-breaking vote. So if George Bush wins the presidency, then Dick Cheney, who served in the House but never served in the Senate, would be the tie-breaking vote in a 50-50 Senate situation. Keep in mind, George Bush is on the edge of winning the presidency, hasn't won it yet. Our CBS News estimate the Republicans will retain control of the House, and as Bob Schieffer says, about the best the Democrats can hope is get a 50-50 tie in the Senate. The electoral vote count in the presidential race, 246 for Bush, 242 for Gore, with 270 needed to win. One of the decisive 4 states could fall at any time now. We don't know when. So stay here with us.
But one will go terribly wrong.
It's kind of a mess for a breast case, isn't it?
More like a disaster. All new City of Angels, CBS Thursday.
Presidential race couldn't be any tighter. Let's look them over. 270 electoral votes needed to win. Bush 246, Gore 242. On the overall national vote, this is the way it looks. 48%, with 4 states still out: Florida, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon. Ed Bradley, let's look at the actual vote counts in these states that are still out there.
You know, this is really tight, Dan. I've never seen a race this tight. Looking at 3 states in Iowa, with 91% of the vote in, there is a separation of just 10,000 votes, and Gore is ahead there. In Wisconsin, Gore is ahead with 71% of the vote in. He's up by just 5,000 votes. In Oregon, 53% of the vote in, only 53% of the vote counted, and George Bush is up by, let's see, 19,000 there. And in Florida, that margin is still coming down with 89% of the vote in. I'd say that it's down now to less than 75,000 votes in favor of George Bush at this point, and that's again with 89% of the vote in. So it is really tight.
Again, want to point out that in Florida, it's always been a big absentee ballot state. The absentee ballot counting in Florida generally goes slowly. Some 30,000 estimated absentee ballots will be coming from overseas. Maybe a long while before they can get counted. The Bush people think a majority of them would go their way because, say, the Bush people, most of those have to be from military people. Whether any of that is true or not, there's no way to say. What we can say, I want to show you the race again, that in Florida, which may decide the whole thing in the end, it's 50 to 48% Bush over Gore, with 89% of the precincts reporting. But the Gore people insist, we have no way of individually, separately verifying. The Gore people insist that most of the votes not actually counted so far in Florida are from the so-called Gold Coast in southeast Florida, where the Gore people think they'll do very well. So they're still, they say they're confident. The fact of the matter is they're hoping against hope that they can come from behind in Florida and still take it. I repeat for emphasis, we may not know in Florida for many more hours and possibly even days how that state's going to go, but George Bush, even if he doesn't carry Florida, even if we don't know tonight whether he carries it or not, if he wins Iowa and Wisconsin and Oregon, the three other states out, then Bush would win. Whereas Gore has got to have Florida and at least one other of the three states still out to win. Leslie Stahl, the race has been hanging out there. Vermont governor, anything late on that?
Yes, we finally have a call in Vermont. The Democrat incumbent Howard Dean, going for a fifth two-year term, won despite his support for the Civil Unions Act that gives the same legal benefits and rights to gay couples as married couples. The election was said to be a referendum on that controversial law, but Nebraska and Nevada passed bans on gay marriage by 2-1 in both states. Dan.
And Leslie, underscoring in our CBS News estimate, the Republicans have retained control of the House. Bob, in the Senate, quick pop to bring us up to date on how that stands.
Well, the Democrats have now picked up a net 2 seats, so they would now have, they started the evening, Republicans had a 54-46 majority, that's down to 52-48. We still have races out there. We may have a 50-50 tie in the Senate.
May have a 50-50 tie in the Senate now, and that would mean the vice president, whoever that may be, would vote in case of tie votes in the Senate. He wouldn't vote on every vote, he'd vote in case of tie votes.
No, just on tie votes. He would not be allowed to come out on the Senate floor and make speeches. But in case of a tie, he would cast the deciding vote.
If we can, let's get up very quickly the Senate map. We started tonight with 34 Senate races up for grabs. The Democrats have to win 20 in order to, they have to win 20 tonight to gain control of the Senate. The Republicans have to win 15 to retain control of the Senate. It's not yet certain that they can do so. In the all-important presidential race, 246 Bush, 242 Gore, with 270 electoral votes needed to win. 4 states are still out there. Election night on CBS. Shady to Bush, but no decision yet. That's a CBS News election night headline of this hour. Bush on the verge, but not yet there. Better pull the cot up to the television set and don't get too comfy. Don't count sheep. We may still be counting electoral votes for hours before we can make the call for president. On the other hand, it could suddenly turn and have a decision. Things in television frequently happen suddenly, same in politics. It's 1 a.m. in the East, and this is the all-important electoral vote count. It takes 270 to win, 246 for Bush, 242 for Gore, with 4 states still out there. This is the up-to-the-minute popular vote count. Bush clinging to a 1 percentage point lead. It looks like the Republicans may have 2 of their tripod legs in place, keeping control of the House and possibly the Senate as well. The third and final leg, the presidency, is still certainly not locked tight, although you heard the Democratic Senator Torricelli from New Jersey say a few moments ago that even he thought it was advantage Bush, but he said it depends on where those outstanding votes are in Florida. Republicans have not had control of all 3, presidency, Senate, and House, at once in almost half a century. Eisenhower in 1952 had all 3. He's the last Republican to have that. Now, the Democrats had the presidency, the Senate, and the House in the Carter administration in the 1970s and as late as the 1972 in the Clinton first term. But the Republicans haven't controlled all three since 1952. That gives you some idea of what the importance of this whole thing is. I want to show you the vote counts now. Let's go down the line. First in Florida. This is the way it looks in Florida tonight, with 25 electoral votes hanging in the balance. Bush has a 50 to 48% lead. A lot of absentee votes still out there. This is with 90% of the precincts actually in and reporting. However, if the precinct's still out, if they are in traditionally Democratic territory down on the southeast coast, this could bounce back the other way, but it will take a lot for Gore to get there. In the state of Iowa, let's take a quick look in Iowa. That state said the polls closed for a very long time, and the actual votes in and counted, this was 93% of the precincts reporting Gore leads in Iowa. We'll go to Wisconsin and Oregon in a few moments, but first, John Roberts in Nashville. What are you hearing about Florida there, John?
Well, Dan, apparently there were some ballot boxes that were left behind at a polling station. They were in Broward County, and the Sheriff's Department apparently has accounted for them. They were left behind by some inexperienced volunteers. They're now going to count those, and they could add to the vote tally one way or the other. Whether or not they would go to Al Gore, it's unsure. We don't know if that was a Democratic stronghold, but certainly there's a large Jewish vote in the Broward County area. They are Democratic supporters, and it could shift it somewhat, Dan.
Thanks a lot, John Roberts. John making the point, because the Gore people are making the point to them, that they cling to the idea, and it's not too far-fetched, they cling to the idea that in the 10% of the precincts still out and not counted in Florida, including that rather unusual case of some ballot boxes, quote, being left behind by some inexperienced volunteers, unquote, that the Gore people cling to the idea that that might bring Gore from behind in Florida now and yet win the state for him. The Bush people come right back and say, listen, we think we're going to win Florida, partly because in the absentee vote count, we're going to do very well, and particularly with the absentee votes, some 30,000 yet to be counted from overseas, apparently. Now, let me go back to the board. In Wisconsin, this is the way the race looks at this moment for Wisconsin's 11 electoral votes, 48% to 48%, about a 5,000 vote plus lead for Al Gore. This is code blue for all candidates involved here, Bush and Gore certainly. Each of them needs this very badly, because remember that Bush can go home tonight, he can go to sleep tonight being president of the United States, even if he doesn't carry Florida, if he carries Wisconsin, Iowa, and Oregon. Gore, on the other hand, needs to carry Florida and one of the other outstanding states. Just so tight in Wisconsin. In Oregon, and Ralph Nader a factor in Wisconsin, in Oregon, 7 electoral votes there. Bush leads 49 to 46%. This was with 54% of the precincts reporting. Bush has actually widened his lead by a little bit there in recent hours, but still just over half the votes counted. Nader hanging in with 4% of the vote in Oregon. Bob Schieffer, with Gore and Bush, Bush is oh so close to having it, but Gore is clinging to this hope that in Florida there'll be a rush of votes right at the end that'll win it for him.
Well, you can't blame him. I mean, the way everything else has gone tonight, who knows what's going to happen next? I mean, if you had to make a bet at this time, you would say with Bush slightly ahead in Florida, with a big absentee vote expected, and with a lot of that expected to be military, as you pointed out earlier in the evening, you have to say at this point, if you had to be backed into a corner and make a bet, you'd say that Bush was probably going to win Florida. But boy, I wouldn't bet any money on it at this time. This thing, I mean, who knows how this is coming out, Dan?
Bob Schieffer. Electoral vote count, 246 Bush, 242 Gore, with 270 needed to win. The race is still, it's Bush's to lose at this point, but he can lose it. Anthony Mason on the poll watch desk. Voters cited the economy as their big issue. That being the case, why isn't Al Gore doing better?
Well, that's the question, Dan, and it's going to be the enduring enigma of this election. The economy, the #1 issue, so in the midst of what is the greatest economic expansion in our history, how does a sitting vice president running for the White House not win in a landslide? Well, here are several possible reasons. When we asked voters, should the government do more to solve problems, as Al Gore's been advocating, a majority told us no, 52%. That hurts Gore, of course. When we asked voters if the country was headed in the right moral direction, a strong majority, 57%, said no. That moral climate helped motivate Republican voters today to turn out strongly for Bush. Higher than in '96, as you can see, and higher than in '92. Conservative voters also came back to the Republican Party today. 81% voted Republican today. That's up significantly from 4 years ago. All of those factors, Dan, have helped to offset the extraordinary economy Gore had to run on. And in this case, the old Clinton campaign slogan doesn't work. It's not the economy stupid tonight, Dan.
Anthony Mason. With Florida, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon still undecided, it's 246 Bush,